I think the big eye-opener for a lot of people is that, oh my goodness, all the problems I was having was because of the way I was going about things. These weren't horse problems. These were the way I was going about things problems.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Reinforce the Horse. Today we are here with Warwick Schiller. And as a lifelong equestrian, Warwick initially focused his competitive efforts on reining, eventually becoming a National Reining Horse Association Reserve World Champion and representing Australia at the 2010 and 2018 World Equestrian Games. Along the way, Warwick not only discovered a passion and talent for teaching, but he also became aware of a consuming curiosity about how things can be done differently. Through a chance encounter with a horse 7 years ago that shifted his perspective on horses and life a complete 180 degrees, he is now excited about teaching connection and relationship-based interactions and training with horses. Warwick hosts the Journey On podcast, where he interviews amazing people from around the world, striving to learn about their paths which set them aside from cultural and societal conditioning. Warwick is also the author of Principles of Training, which has been an Amazon best-selling book in the equine category. Warwick, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on and hanging out with us for a little while. It's really great to have you here.
No problem at all.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to start and ask where your horsemanship journey ultimately began.
Well, where the horsemanship journey and where the horse journey are probably two different things. But I started, I grew up on a 1,200-acre sheep and wheat farm in Australia, and my father was into rodeoing, and so we always had horses around there. But I didn't start riding, I think, till I was about 7. Was about when I started riding. As far as I don't have a whole lot of memories about it, but I think that's as far as I can figure. And the reason I can figure that is because when I was in the 5th grade, so I was 10, I broke my arm at a rodeo in a steer riding, and I know I've been riding horses for a few years before I was riding those things. So that's kind of how I put two and two together.
So at age 7, you started your horse, like actually being around horses. I've listened to a lot of your show. Alyssa's listened to a lot of your show. And I know you've had like a tremendous transformation. And I guess on just a side note of that, like clearly you're like a celebrity to me. And I would even say more so than a celebrity. You have become more or less like a guru to me in some ways, just by your vulnerability and your ability to kind of share the depths of your soul with the world. And I'm just curious if you can kind of lead us into that, how you ultimately found your way from, working on this farm as a child and getting involved in horses, and then leading into this career that you had. I think it was when you talked with Christine Dixon, or maybe you've mentioned it on many episodes, that you talk about how you wanted to be a horse trainer, and like you just never kind of let that idea of things leave your mind.
It wasn't that I wanted to be a horse trainer, but I grew up around rodeos, and we had quarter horses, so we showed in like the Western sort of events and things like that. And there's lots of Westerns on TV, and I just was really drawn to like the horses in the American West, because it wasn't that I was just drawn to horses. Like I didn't want to do I didn't want to be a dressage rider or a jumping rider or something. Rather, I was drawn to the Western lifestyle sort of thing. And we showed horses as kids quite a bit. And there used to be a thing called the Youth World Cup, and I think they still might have it, but it was kids that show quarter horses from Australia, New Zealand, America, Canada, Italy, Germany, possibly France, England, maybe a few others. And they would host that competition in different countries each year. And when I was about 15, maybe 16, I wanted to be on. That's one thing I wanted to do, was be on that team. And I went to the qualifying show in Australia, and I won pretty much everything. And I thought, yeah, I'm going to be on the team. And I didn't ever get chosen for the team. And looking back now, there's no funding for it. So I think they only chose the kids whose parents could afford to send them overseas, but that year it was going to be in America, and I always had wanted to come to America. And then, so I was really good at math in school, and I ended up working for a bank. And at the time, that bank would allow you to take what they call a year's leave without pay, which means you could take a year off. You'd still have a job somewhere when you come back. So I worked for a national bank, so they have branches in pretty much every town in Australia. And so they would, you'd get a job somewhere where you came back. And I came to America for a year, and I wanted to learn how to train, a little bit about training reining horses, so I could kind of do it myself and do it with my own at home. And, I've never had a lot of self-confidence. And so, I worked for a big-time trainer for a year. And when I was leaving, the day I was leaving, we shook hands on the porch, and he said, if you want to come back, I'll give you a job. He said, you could do this for a living if you wanted to. And that was the first time being a horse trainer for a living ever crossed my mind, because I'm not the kind of guy like, yes, I know what I'm doing and I can do that and that and that. That's not really the way I'm wired, or the way I ended up being wired, And so it wasn't until he said that I actually thought that might be a possibility.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You're basically given this idea from somebody who saw something within you that you didn't see within yourself.
Yeah, and not just that. I mean, everything I'm doing now, and we can get into that later. But yeah, I've like I said, I've never had a lot of self-confidence, and so I've never been the one that I'm gung-ho, I'm going to do that. Everything I've done and I'm currently doing, somebody else suggested, hey, why don't you try this?
Was your work at the time with the horses, was it the typical kind of you leave your emotion outside the round pen, so to speak, and you go in with the horse and show your confidence, kind of like fake it till you make it sort of thing?
Well, due to looking back now, we've realized is some very early childhood trauma, I didn't have any emotions. And so, it wasn't, training horses was easy for me because I didn't get mad, didn't get sad, didn't get whatever. So I didn't really have to fake it till I made it, because I didn't have anything I needed to leave at the round pen gate, so to speak.
So we mentioned in your bio just earlier that there was a major transformation that took place when you met a horse about 7 years ago. And this took your life a completely 180-degree turn. Can you tell us a little bit about this horse that entered your life, how this horse entered your life?
Yeah, Lisa, I sure can. So at the time, I was training horses. I was doing clinics all around the world. I had an online video library, which I still have, and I think at the time, maybe my YouTube channel had maybe 20 million views on it, something like that. But in other words, I know what I'm doing. I give clinics around the world. People bring horses in. The horses always leave better than they came in. There's not a problem I can't help. I don't necessarily mean I can fix it, but I can certainly make it better. And so I'm starting to believe myself a little bit, maybe a little bit too much. But my wife, we were heavily involved in the reining, and my wife bought a reining horse. And she was actually looking at two horses at the time, and one was, kind of an average sort of a gelding, but the other gelding was this really high-level athletic sort of a horse. They were both the same price, and the reason being the really high-level, really athletic one, they couldn't, what in the business you would call get him shown, meaning he's a superstar. You just can't get it all to happen in the arena in the show situation. And some of the reasons was he did little things like spooked at the judges' chairs and things like that, So the guy that trained him is an amazing reining trainer, but as far as solving all the little behavioural issues, that's not his forte. He's one of the best reining trainers in the world, but solving the little behavioural issues isn't his forte. And I said to my wife, well, buy that one. I can fix all that stuff. That's easy. And so she bought him, and yeah, we did make quite a bit of headway on those sorts of things, but there was a level of tension in him. So it's not outward behavior. It's a level of kind of holding his breath type tension. And in the reining, I don't know if you know anything about reining, but you get so reining, when you walk in the arena, you've got a 70, and you get pluses or minuses from there. You start out with 70, and you get scored on your maneuvers, but you also there's penalties you can incur too. Kind of like, I don't know if you know anything about jumping, but the jumping, it's on time, but then if you knock down a rail, there's penalties, and that's they're taken on, they're added to your time sort of thing. And so one of the penalties in reining is it's a 1-point penalty for every time they're not on the correct lead. Okay, so, and it's from one stride up to a quarter of a circle is a 1-point penalty. Anything from a quarter of a circle to half a circle is 2-point penalty, and so on and so forth. And Sherlock was his horse's name, and he wouldn't actually be on the wrong lead. But when you're running the fast circles, because he was kind of holding in this tension, he'd run around and he would bounce his hind feet together. So instead of having the inside hind leg reach forward in front of the outside hind leg, he would pop them together for a stride just because he's tense. Well, that's a 1-point penalty. It's not that you're on the wrong lead, you're not on the correct lead. And a canter stride, the horses hind feet shouldn't hit the ground together. So, if you run them too fast and they start scrambling around there, they'll do that. That wasn't the case with Sherlock. But anyway, I was trying to get rid of this tension so he didn't bounce his hind feet together. And he would do it 2 or 3 times in a pattern, which means, if you were really good, you could probably score a 74. So you start with a 70, you take the whole pattern to gain 4 credit points. He could lose 3 credit points easily just by running around and bounce his hind feet together here in like a split second, and then do it there and then do it there. And my wife was still showing him, but she was still placing quite well, and every once in a while she'd win because he was that athletic. But he'd do all the hard stuff easy. It was just the easy stuff he couldn't do. So, but with him, it's the more I tried to, at this point in time, I was a horse trainer. I train horses. And I was always very on the empathetic end of the scale and really trying to get into their mind. I wasn't the dominant type trainer. But I was still it was still a training perspective that I was looking at it, and I could not train this horse not to do these things. So I kind of stopped trying. I'm like, that's how he is. I kind of stepped away from trying to make him any different than he was. But he kind of got me thinking, I can't help him. I wonder what else there is. And up until that point in time, any new information I'd been looking for was always training information, horse training information, how to shape the behavior of the horse through training. And he made me step away and start to look at things that were outside of the training paradigm, you might say, more relationship-based stuff. And I'd never really looked at much of that before because nobody I'd seen who was into the, relationship type stuff with their horses could get their horse to do anything. Yeah, sure, your horse hangs out with you in the pasture or whatever, but how's your left to right flying lead change? How's the technical stuff? No one that I'd ever seen that would do that end could do the other end. So I thought that's not related to that. But I really started looking into that and really started to realize that the reason Sherlock was like he was because he's in what they call a shutdown state. So if you think about nervous system states, you'll go from the parasympathetic nervous system, which is, your rest and digest, your relaxed state. And if, let's say a horse gets worried about something, he sees something in the distance that might be concerned to him, he gets curious, concerned, and then if he has to run, he'll run. But let's say it's a predator chasing an animal and they run and the predator catches them, they then go into like what they call a freeze mode. There's no use struggling if a predator's got you bit by the neck, because you'll just tear yourself to pieces on their neck. So you go into kind of a freeze sort of a mode. And what I'd come to realize was Sherlock was kind of stuck in a freeze mode. He could do all this cool stuff while he was in a freeze mode.
Did you find yourself that you were sort of in a freeze mode yourself?
Oh, most certainly, yeah. In trying to unravel Sherlock, I got to looking into all sorts of things, and it was interesting. I was at a horse expo in Madison, Wisconsin, exactly 7 years ago, last weekend. And one of the things they have you do at horse expos when you present there is sometimes you'll do instead of doing a demo in an arena with a horse, you'll actually do a lecture in a lecture hall. And I had to do one there. And those horse expos, they want you to send your titles in, months ahead of time. So there's one, I have a title that I would always send in for these horse expo lecture things, which was everything I learned in life that I learned from horses. And I could talk about anything in that thing. And so in this particular one, I'd been experimenting with different things with horses. This is probably a year after I'd stopped trying to do anything with Sherlock. So we probably got Sherlock 8 or 9 years ago, probably 8 years ago. But I'd started doing some things differently and trying things differently. And so when I was in front of this crowd of people in this lecture hall, I admitted to them, to this crowd of 200 strangers, that probably things I'd probably never even admitted to myself before. And so when I finished with that lecture, I was heading back to my booth and I walked past this other trainer who had a booth near me, and she said, "So how'd your lecture go?" And I said, "Oh, I'm exhausted. I feel like I've been run over by a truck." And she said, "Why is that?" And I said, "Well, I kind of admitted to a room full of strangers some stuff that I've probably never even admitted to myself before." And she said, "Oh, well, Brené Brown says that vulnerability is the ultimate badassery." And I was like, "Who?" Anyway, I came home from that thing and I looked up Brené Brown and I got some of her audio books, and I'd be out on the tractor with my noise cancelling headphones on, moving manure or whatever I was doing, listen to these things. And one of the things she said in one of those books was you cannot selectively suppress emotions. When you suppress the lower emotions, you automatically suppress the higher emotions. And so I, growing up as a boy in Australia, you're not supposed to cry, you don't show fear. In my family, you don't show grief. So, I remember going to funerals and my parents would go, "Oh, he's dead. No use worrying about that." And so I realized I had some stuck or suppressed lower emotions, but I'd never thought, could I actually experience more happiness or joy or any of those sorts of things. So that kind of led me to a year of going and seeing a therapist, both group and individual and group therapy, and learning stuff about therapy and the nervous system really made me start to realize, put all this together with the horses. And, a lot of behavioral issues with horses are actually horse mental health problems. So, I've kind of gone down the path of almost being a mental health practitioner for horses, even though that's probably the first time I've ever said that way. But it's really, that I'm really into, relationship with horses, what I call relationship before horsemanship. So developing connection and relationship before you actually try to train them. And then you take that relationship into the training, and it's a paradigm shift. Like, it's a completely different animal when you go about it that way. I think, most training and training techniques are all about, whether they know it or not, all about how to deal with a horse with a dysregulated nervous system. When you work on that relationship stuff first and you get the nervous system regulated, so they're not worried about you, they're actually happy to be around you, but they're they're not around you because, sometimes people like put pressure on horses when they're away from them and leave them alone when they're near them. And that's what gets the horse to come over here. That's almost just like the worst, the best bad place. When you work on this relationship stuff, horses actually seek out us and want to hang out with us. And if you go about it the right way, they're quite happy to do anything you ask them to do.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I've heard you talk about this a number of times on your show and with various experts and your guests, of just the fact that, like, as humans in our current society, we are very, like, our nervous systems are constantly overstimulated just by virtue of us living. I mean, for me, it was like when I relocated to the country and horses entered my life, I started to recognize that. So you mentioned the idea of, people who can be around the horses and they're all lovey-dovey with them and they have this nice relationship, but they can't get them to do anything. Do you have a particular timeline when you start working with a new horse? Are you on a time constraint when you're working with a horse to get them to do something?
No, not at all. I am actually. It's not a time constraint, but I want to get to the end as quick as I can get there, and the quickest way to get there is the slow way. And so, people go, "Oh, you're so patient." So I did a demo the other day. I just got back from Minnesota, where I presented at the Minnesota Horse Expo, and one of the sessions I had was called Catching the Hard to Catch Horse. And the horse that they brought in, it was just a young horse, probably shouldn't have even been there. It was about 10 months old, I think. Weaned too early, 10 months old. I don't even know what I was doing at the Horse Expo. But so they turned this horse loose in the arena, and I've got a 2-hour session. And for the first hour and 15 minutes, nothing much changes, because I'm not trying to catch the horse. I'm trying to communicate to the horse my awareness of their awareness and trying to make them feel safe in that environment. And this little horse is just running around. He goes home, sticks his head over the gate, runs around, sticks his head over the gate, runs around. Anyway, probably about an hour and 15 minutes, not much happened. And then he started to feel much better, and he started to kind of explore the arena. So instead of being anxious and with his head over the gate wishing he was somewhere else, his mind and his body were in the same place at the same time, and he started what we call seeking behavior. So putting his nose on the ground and sniffing around the area. So he was in the room sort of thing. Then he started exploring all over the arena. Then probably an hour and 25 minutes was the first time he just walked straight up to me and says hi. And then probably about an hour and 35 minutes, he gets to where he walks up to me and hangs out with me. And if I walk off, he just follows me around. I walk around to the left, he walks around to the left, I walk around to the right, he walks around to the right. And, so for an hour and 15 minutes, it looked like nothing was happening. It was just doing the same little things over and over. And someone came by the booth afterward and said, "You're so patient." I said, "I'm not patient." I said, "There's people who won't do that work, and so they've got a hard-to-catch horse for 10 years. I'm not patient enough to have a hard-to-catch horse for 10 years. Because that exercise works basically every time you ever do it. And so I've got an hour and 15 minutes to do seemingly nothing, but in an hour and 35 minutes, I had the horse not only would walk up to me, but would follow me around at liberty, whether I walked around to the right or the left or in a straight line. And so I tell people, I'm the least patient person you ever met. So the reason I take my time so much is because I want to get to the end as fast as I can possibly get there. I don't have 10 years to have a horse that is hard to catch. I don't have 3 years to have a horse that's anxious when it's ridden. I'm impatient, and that's why I am so patient.
I love this. I'm curious when you're in that space with this horse that in the beginning sounds like he was very overstimulated and his system was overregulated. Where was your being, your emotional state and your mental state as you're with him? Were you communicating with him telepathically?
No. The big thing that I do, I think horses are, well, there was probably two things I was doing with him, but horses are horses communicate posturally and energetically. Let's say you've got 4 horses out in a field and they're all grazing. Their heads are down and they're grazing. Let's say they're like north, south, east, west. Their heads are down and they're grazing. So their posture is relaxed and their energy is relaxed. And then let's say the one on the north side of the pasture or the north side of the group notices something off in the distance and his head pops up and he gets a bit tense. So he's had a postural change and an energetic change. And the other horses sense that and see that and like, what? And they'll all look up at what he's looking at. They don't see what he's looking at, but they're looking in the direction he's looking in. And then he realizes, oh no, it's nothing. And his posture changes and his energy goes back down. Their postures will change and their energy will go back down too. And so I think where a lot of people have trouble with their horses is they're unaware of their posture and their energy around horses all the time. And so horses don't listen to our postural energetic changes because it's not relative. It doesn't mean anything. It's like, it's like music playing in the other room or, whatever. So with this horse, so if you think about in 800 BC, a Chinese philosopher named Lao Tzu said, if you're depressed, you're living in the past. If you're anxious, you're living in the future. And if you are peaceful, you're living in the present. So this little horse, when he was over at the gate with his head over the gate, his body's at the gate, but his mind is much further away. His mind is somewhere else. And all I would do is I would be standing, and I do this exercise all the time. It's probably the first exercise I do with any horse. I'm standing still a long way away from him in the arena, and I've got one leg cocked, so I'm going to hip shot, And then I will straighten up my legs so my posture changes, and then I'll start to walk in a big arc somewhere around, and I'll pull out my flag and just slowly wave it around. And if his ear, like let's say both ears are over the fence, if one of his ears flicks to me like, what's that over there? I'll immediately stop what I'm doing. So I'm doing 2 things there. I'm getting his focus from anxiety kind of back to the present, but I'm also communicating from a large distance that I saw that and my posture changed when your thoughts changed. So I'm communicating with him from probably 200 feet away that I'm so in tune with you that I saw your thoughts change. There's no physical anything going on at this point in time. And if you think about, if you've ever seen a horse, he's in a pasture with all his friends, and you go out and you catch him and you start to lead him away from his friends, and suddenly he's running around in circles and screaming, whereas he wasn't. He's still in the same area he was in before, but now he seems frantic. And he wants to go back to his friends. And what does he want from his friends? He doesn't want he wants to feel safe, but he doesn't want he's not after the physicality of his friends. It's not like 2 of his friends go to martial arts classes on a Wednesday night, and if the saber-tooth tiger comes along, we're going to beat him up. It's the friends provide awareness so that north, south, east, west thing can happen. Those postural and energetic changes can alert me to danger. So I don't have to be on high alert all the time because everybody else is keeping an eye out as well. It's all kind of a group thing. And so the more you can communicate with them how aware you are, if you think about that young horse, he wanted to go back to his friends because they provide me with a level of awareness to share. They share the awareness burden, so I don't have to keep an eye out in every direction. So what I'm trying to do 2 things. I'm trying to get his thoughts back with his body instead of them being separated, so he's more present. And in the doing so, I'm trying to communicate how aware I am, because it's that awareness from another sentient being that they're craving to feel safe. And so at one point in time, he, like I said, it's probably an hour and 15 minutes. I'd done it enough times to where he's like, this guy notices everything. He might be safe to be around. So he walked up to me and hung out with me for a bit, and then he walked away, and he came back a couple of times. And at one point in time, he walked up to me, and then he walked slightly past me and kind of backed up to me. And I said, is there anybody in the crowd that thinks he's now disrespecting me and might want to kick me? And a few people put their hand up, and I said, well, that is one perspective, but I'm going to give you another perspective. He has just said, I got your back. I'll keep an eye out on this 180 degrees. You keep an eye out on that 180 degrees. And the people had raised their hands, kind of went, oh, I never thought of it that way. So if you think of horses as they have to respect me, you'll have that sort of an outlook on things. And that, the thing I'm trying to get people to realize these days is that in a herd of horses, like a wild herd of horses, they're just like our ancestors, hunter-gatherers. So hunter-gatherer societies did everything, like every person had a role to play, and they did the role that they were best suited for. Okay, so anybody in a particular position is not in that position as a position of power over others. It's care for others. Okay, the way politics should be. And it's the same with a herd of horses. Like if there's a herd of horses and there's two horses fighting, usually they're fighting over a position, holding a position. Who gets to do this job? And it's not because I want the job because I get all the benefits. It's I want the job because I want to do the best job I can for the whole. So it's not power over, it is care for. And, because we come from a dominance type society, we have kings and queens and prime ministers and presidents, and there's a hierarchy. We tend to bring that into our understanding of interactions of, like say with the hunter-gatherers. I had a guy on the podcast who has spent a lot of time with the hunter-gatherers in Botswana, and he was a documentary filmmaker, and he was saying, when you go and make a documentary film about hunter-gatherers, when you go out there into the desert or wherever, one guy comes out of the tribe to talk to you, and so we tend to think, he's the chief, he makes all the decisions. But really, he's the guy who may speak English or French or has had interactions with outsiders, and so he's the best person to interact with you. So from their perspective, they're sending the best person to interact with you. From our perspective, he's the boss. And once you realize that horses are the same way, what I was doing in that interaction with him was telling him, I notice very little. I can notice little things. I'm not here to ask anything of you, and I notice little things. And he's like, well, you'd make a good sentinel. I think you're better at that job than I am. I'll just relax and let you take over that job. You could very easily interpret it as, I'll let you be in charge. He's not letting me be in charge. He's letting me serve that function, if that makes sense. And that's, so it's a totally different perspective than a lot of people have with horses. And the more I do it, the deeper the understanding of it gets. But now these days I'm really trying to tell people every interaction you have with your horse is a job interview. And the more you can communicate your awareness, the more they will hand over that sentinel position to you, and they just want to hang out with you, and hey, you can keep an eye out, you're pretty good at that. And this is where a lot of the work I do with horses, people will tell me, in order to do in the process of doing this work and getting good with this work, I now notice I'm so much better with my husband and my kids and my co-workers and my bosses, whatever, because you kind of have to change a bit about how you view the world and how you show up in the world for this stuff to work. And it's not equine-assisted therapy, because equine-assisted therapy is you sign up for therapy and they use a horse for it. This is me teaching people how to get along with their horses, but I do think that the outcomes are somewhat similar.
So as you were explaining all that, the number one word that came to mind was empathy. And I remember reading about that in your book. I know you mentioned empathy in your book. I can't remember exactly where, what chapter it was in, but am I feeling you there? Like it's like you're empathizing with the horse's situation, and they're in turn kind of reciprocating that? Or am I totally missing the mark?
No, you're totally on the mark. But empathy, you got to remember that, understand that empathy and sympathy are two different things. And I learned this from Brené Brown. If anybody hasn't listened to Brené Brown, listen to her. But empathy and sympathy are two different things. Sympathy is, sucks to be you. Empathy is, I feel what you're feeling. Not not I understand what you're feeling, I feel what you're feeling. And, I think as a child, I know that as a child and as an adult, that I'm what they call a highly sensitive person. And I grew up in a culture that you're not allowed to be a highly sensitive person. So, probably my concerns weren't listened to. My emotions weren't listened to. I was told not to have them, sort of thing. So I really feel like a lot of times when I'm working with horses, it's almost like I'm helping another sentient being who's in the situation I had been in as a child, and I get a chance to do that for someone else, basically. I wasn't the anxious type. I was the shutdown type. But shutdown comes on the other when anxiety doesn't. You're anxious and you're not allowed to be anxious. And so empathy is definitely feeling what they're feeling and understand where they're coming from. And I think the understand where they're coming from is a big part of, a few years ago I changed my business from Warwick Schiller performance horsemanship to Warwick Schiller attuned horsemanship, because attunement is the sense of being seen, being heard, feeling felt, and getting gotten. So, if you think about the being seen, I see you, okay? Being heard, yes, I hear you. I hear what you're saying. Feeling felt. So I feel what you're feeling, and getting gotten. I get where you're coming from. I understand your point of view. I understand what you are feeling right now. And I really feel that, that's empathy, is understanding their plight. I think a lot of horse training is about a lot of horse training techniques. If a horse's nervous system is dysregulated, they're either shut down or they're outwardly anxious, is I'm trying to stop the behavior. I'm trying to correct behavior. I'm trying to fix the behavior. I'm not trying to fix the behavior. I'm trying to fix the disconnection or the feeling alone or feeling scared that's causing the behavior. Because a lot of horse training techniques is a little bit like the parenting style that was around when I was a kid, which is stop crying, I'll give you something to cry about. And you think about, as a small child, you've got a caregiver. They're the one who's going to look out for you, and you have an emotion, fear, frustration, whatever it is, probably fear, but anyway, and you express that emotion, and they tell you to stop crying, or I will give you something to cry about. So stop showing me your fear, or stop showing me you're scared, or stop whatever, or I'll give you something to be scared about. You feel alone in the world. And I really think that having that experience, and I can really empathize with that experience. And so I'm not trying to fix the problem. Like this 2-hour session with the hard to catch horse, I wasn't trying to catch him. If a horse is hard to catch, I want to undo his perceptions about humans, because no horse is hard to catch. Every horse would like to hang out with a human when you just take away all the reasons they don't want to hang out with us. It's not like we don't have to teach them to want to hang out with us. We have to get rid of all the reasons they don't want to hang out with us, and then they just want to hang out with us.
For sure. And it goes right back to building a strong connection with these sentient beings that in all reality, they just want to be seen, heard, felt, and gotten in their own ways.
Alyssa,
I'm curious.
How old are you?
Go ahead. 18.
Yeah, when I was 18, I didn't even know what the word sentient being was. There was us, and everything else wasn't us. I was 50 before I started thinking about things differently. So, yeah, the thing about people like you, Alyssa, I'm excited for what the future brings if there's people your age looking at things from the perspective that you're looking at it. I think it's super cool.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. It warms my heart. But I want to ask you, so there was a shift that took place from where you used to exist with horses, where you used to work with them, how you used to visual and see them, to now where you're using relationship before horsemanship. Can you tell us a little bit about how you felt like horses were around you before this shift came to your life?
Well, like I said, I was really quite on the empathetic scale of training. So my horses were, they were not scared of me, were not worried about me. If I was to classify them, they were slightly on the shutdown scale. And I'm talking slightly, I'm not talking completely by any means. And they kind of knew that this was an employee relationship, employee-employer type relationship. It wasn't warm and fuzzy, but it also wasn't, there was no, you rotten son of a, it was, I think we were friends. We're just friends on a much shallower level. I can recall that I used to be able to, like when I trained horses that lived in stalls, I used to be able to go in a stall, catch a horse, lead him out, brush him, saddle him up, go ride him, bring him back, hose him off, put him away, whatever, and never actually, I wouldn't say see them, because I would notice, if they looked angry or grumpy or whatever, I'd notice all those things. But probably what I didn't notice was their eyes. I probably was never just boom, right there. Whereas I can't go near a horse now without looking in their eyes and actually kind of seeing their soul, sort of thing. It's not like I just spend all day staring at their eyes, but I'm aware of that. I'm much more aware of what's going on inside. And I think, the further you go along, the more you get that. Jason, you had asked before, maybe it was Alyssa, I can't remember. One of you asked about when I was working with that horse at the Horse Expo, what energy I have, am I sending some sort of a mental transmission or whatever? And for me, no, there's none of that. I'm just very aware of my energy, my posture, and how it relates to their energy and their posture. That's the, we had a clinic here at our ranch here in California a couple of weekends ago, and there was a couple of guys, one guy in the clinic and one guy watching the clinic, who were really into Tai Chi, like really into Tai Chi. The guy watching the clinic was telling me that he saw a Tai Chi master one time take his hand kind of cupped a little bit like this in front of a guy's chest. And so if you guys at home, imagine your hand is slightly cupped in front of you like you're kind of holding half a ball, and then straighten it out so it's perfectly perpendicular to the ground. So this Tai Chi guy went like that and threw a guy back 10 feet. And when the guy got up, he had a handprint on his back, not on the front of him, but on the back of him. That's all energetic. And I was talking to these two guys about Tai Chi, and I said, that's not the sort of energy I'm talking about. I'm just being aware of my internal energy, but it's not developing chi and pushing it and all that sort of thing. And these guys both looked at each other and they said, "We think you are, you just don't know you're doing it." But as far as me being conscious of it, I don't. Because when I teach, I teach exactly what's going on. I mean, that's not something I talk about because I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. It leads me into a question of, all the guests that you've had on your podcast, and a lot of them, when I first started listening, it was kind of like, the ultra woo, but over the past
if you thought the start of it was the ultra woo, then it got
I mean, it was just like this stuff is great, but at the time, I mean, this was a year and a half ago, And I was just entering this realm of existence. So I've always wondered about you, like as you're, working with the horses or even in your day-to-day life, like, are you, like, do you believe that people can communicate with horses?
I don't know. I don't believe it. I know it. And, and the thing about people who can do that stuff, this is one of the conversations that come up on the podcast all the time, is if you can do something like that, what were the things that happened in your life that allowed you to do that? Because I feel like we're all born with the ability to do that sort of thing, and our societal and cultural conditioning dulls that out of us. And some people, their parents were hippies and talked to trees, so they thought that was normal. And then some people had that dulled down out of them, and then they had a like a near-death experience, or had some sort of a spiritual awakening thing to where they realized there's more to the world than what they thought there was. I had one lady on the podcast who was she was a psychiatrist, had all the, had a PhD, was practicing in South Carolina, was, going down the straight talk therapy route. And she had a client in her office one day, and suddenly she heard this voice that wasn't coming out of the person across the room from her. And the voice said it was the dead grandmother of the person across the room, and I want you to tell her a message for me. And so, sometimes people work at these perceptions, and sometimes they just come to them. But I'm, because I really don't feel like I have access to those things. Notice I didn't say I don't have them. I don't have access to them. I think those are the people that I really love having on the podcast, because I'm like, how did you get that? There's a book I've talked about on the podcast quite a bit. I actually had the author of the book on the podcast. The book's called Radical Wholeness, and it's by a guy named Philip Shepherd. And in this book, they talk about an East African tribe called the Anglo-Ewe tribe. And they, we've been told we have 5 senses. The Anglo-Ewe think we have 10 or 12 or something like that. But one of those senses is a thing they call seselalame. That's their word for it. And that translates into English as feel with the flesh from the inside out. And so your whole body is like a tuning fork. You can pick up energies, feel energies, whatever. And I think that's something that we all have the ability to do. So it's not, I tell you what, you mentioned Christine Dixon before, and she did a retreat here with me last year. And in that retreat, Christine said, you don't need to get your light to shine brighter. She says, I think we're all born this shining light, and then as life happens, we get like these little silk scarves get put over that light that each one, it's so thin, you don't notice it dulls a little bit, but you get a big pile of silk scarves over your light, and your light's pretty dim, but you don't need more light. You need less scarves. You need to peel those scarves off. And I think when you do that, those senses or abilities that we have can come back again. There's a place in Utah it's actually a martial arts studio, but they teach something called vibrovision. So what they do is they teach you to see in the dark. So they put these blackout masks on you. So this is not just an eye mask. This is a absolute total blackout mask. And they write it down, look it up. There's videos on YouTube of this that are crazy. I actually saw it in a documentary one time. But they will have people run like obstacle courses where you've got to duck under things, jump over things, run around things. You've got to pick up a pin and poke balloons and all sorts of things, and you cannot see a thing. They will have these little, they're little like beanbag little things in your hand, like they're, probably the size of your palm. And they'll have a stack of these things of different colors, and they'll have someone standing in front of them with his eye mask on, and they can't see. And they'll start to throw these little beanbag things on the ground, one after another, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the person standing there goes, blue, red, green, red, green, blue, yellow, blue. They can say it that fast, and they can't see it. I don't know what the sense is, whether whether it's a somatic thing. I don't know what sense they're using, but it's called Vibravision. You can learn it. You can go there, and I think it's a 7-day course, and it costs you like $5,000 or something or other. But I saw it in a documentary on like superhuman feats on Netflix or Gaia or something like that. But the people that were in this documentary, there was kids 5 years old, there was grannies 85 years old. Like, you can learn this stuff at any point in time in your life. And I'm not sure I want to go to Utah and spend $5,000 for 7 days to learn that. Maybe I do. But the point I'm trying to make is we all have access to this, and there's just ways to unlock it. But this, when we were hunter-gatherers, or if you know anything about like trackers, like say in Africa or whatever, they can look at a footprint and they see the footprint, they see the shape of the footprint, but they also feel the energetic signature of the footprint, and it tells them a lot more than just the visual does. And like I said, I think we all, when you can get into that, then you can start, like I've had guests on the podcast who can get horses to do things just through mental pictures. I can't yet. But yeah, I think that all those senses are available to us if we can just unravel our societal and cultural conditioning. If you think about anybody that had that sort of perceptions, 600 years ago, was burnt at the stake.
I love the idea that you mentioned that Christine brought up about just the thick layers of the veil. And then as that veil is pared back and we gain access to these, what we would call abilities or gifts, and recognizing who we are at the core, like yoga practices would teach, like we're not this body, we're not even this mind. And so like when we get to the core of our existence of who we truly are, then we're able to ground ourselves with the earth and interact with beings on the planet in the way that we were meant to. It starts to make sense. Whereas it seems like we are so thickened by the veil. I know I was a year and a half ago. I had a veil like titanium around me. But as that starts to thin out, like I have a Palo Verde tree that's like on my way back from the horse paddock that we have here. And we're just at the elevation to where Palo Verde trees don't grow here. And this was a transplant that we got when we moved onto the property back in 2019. And it is now, I would say, 2 or 3 times larger than the mesquite trees that grew here natively. And a lot of that is because I water it on my way back and forth to the horses, if you catch my drift. But it's also the fact that I have talked to this tree and literally communicated with it on a daily basis, and it's thriving. So,
well, when you're talking about things like that, those used to be stories like that used to be, whatever. But science has proven this stuff. They've done scientific experiments with plants, and some of them they say nice things to, and some they say nasty things to, and it does make a difference. If you've ever seen the book by that, I think it was a Japanese researcher about ice crystals. You ever seen that? Where they will say things to water and then freeze it and look at the crystals. And if you say nice things to them, the crystals are perfectly formed like a perfect, like snow crystal, like Christmas flaky thing. And the more hateful things you say to them, the more fractured they are. And I was listening to a podcast the other day, and you might be interested in this. It's a podcast called Sean Ryan show, I think, and he's an ex-Marine. And I don't usually listen to like military podcasts or anything like that. But the reason I listened to it, someone forwarded it to me, is because they had a guy named Colonel Gerald Alexander on there. He's a retired Army colonel, and he commanded a platoon in Vietnam, I think. But then he got into, during the Cold War, he got into the paranormal part of what the Army was trying to do, like remote viewing, telekinesis, things like that, like remote viewing, trying to see what was going on in the Kremlin, that sort of thing. That then he was telling a story about the Army's lead lie detector guy. Lived in Annapolis, Maryland, or somewhere, Virginia, or somewhere back there, maybe New York City. But he lived in an apartment, had all these house plants. And one day he was watering his plants, and he's like, I wonder how long it takes the water to reach the leaves after I water them. So he hooked his leaves of his plant up to a lie detector, because one of the things it has is a galvanic skin response, doesn't it? So it detects moisture. And he left it hooked up there for several days. And then when he looked at the chart, it was like, it doesn't stay constant. It kind of goes up and down way more often than I water the plant. And so then he started to figure out, he started to kind of keep a bit of a log and like what coincides with this plant doing things. And he started to realize that the plant was picking up on the emotions of people in the room, and it was recording on this lie detector test hooked up to the plant. Then he got talking about, and I can't remember exactly how this worked, but they put a plant in a Faraday cage. So a Faraday cage stops any outside signals coming in. But there was something to do with human white blood cells. Now, I'm not sure if they injected them in the plant or whatever it was, but there's something to do with human white blood cells in this plant, in this Faraday cage, hooked up to a lie detector test. And it turns out that with the white blood cells in there, the plant could pick up on the emotions of that human up to 50 miles away. They started in the next room, and then they started moving it further and further. And he said, I actually think that when it comes to energy like that, there is no distance too big. They talk about entanglement and stuff, and you can separate two particles and they can be as far away, they could be galaxies away, and they still are attached to each other. But it was a fascinating podcast. But they got talking about telekinesis. They got to where they could bend spoons and things like that. I actually did a clinic last year or the year before in Maryland. And the lady that was at a big horse rescue called the Gentle Giants Horse Rescue, and the lady that runs the horse rescue was telling me she took the CAA course on spoon bending, on that telekinesis thing. And I thought you look at the spoon and it actually bends. It's not that you actually get the spoon to where you soften it, and you can take your finger and just bend it. And she actually bought her spoon out of the house that she'd bent, and it is now a solid piece of metal. You can't straighten it out. But at the time, she said she bent it with her finger. But this guy, this Colonel Gerald Alexander, he was saying that he was around people who could, like the spoon would just kind of wilt. And so he got a guy who, so tell me this, you'd know this, Jason, who answers to the President of America, or the United States, as the leader of the armed forces? What is that job? Colin Powell used to be that. What's that?
The Secretary of Defense.
Secretary of Defense. So this guy was one step below the Secretary of Defense. So he was like the 2IC in that. So this Gerald Alexander took him to one of these things with the telekinesis to show him, they're talking about military benefits of paranormal things. And this 2IC guy was in the room anyway. The first time someone just melted a spoon by concentrating it or whatever, this guy turned to Gerald Alexander and he paused and he said really slowly, I wish I hadn't seen that. Because like his whole perception of reality has been altered right then, hasn't it? And so Colonel Gerald Alexander was actually featured in a book called Men Who Stare at Goats. And the book was about all this, like if you've ever heard of MK Ultra, that was the CIA's work on trying to work on, mind control, things like that. But they were trying to train these CIA operatives to be able to disarm or kill someone from a distance just by looking at them. what the experiment they were doing, they were trying to kill goats by looking at them. Like basically look at them in a certain way with a certain energy and it stops their heart. And so that's why the book was called Men Who Stare at Goats, because you'd go to this thing and there's these guys just standing around staring at these goats. And apparently they could do it.
It's wild.
That's fascinating.
There's so much, and it's just like it comes all back around to we are energy at the core. That's what we are. And I think horses are like maybe it's just because I've chosen to work with horses in some regard or have them in my life. I don't even consider myself somebody who works with horses. But they're like huge antennas to this energy that we are. And so they mirror that. And then working with them allows us to kind of break down the veil if we're so ready and willing and able to do that.
Yeah, the thing with horses is they're very good at detecting incongruent behavior. And so, all of your parts have to line up. You can't be kind of faking something. You can't be pretending something. They're really good at detecting that and helping people train their horses to do things. That comes up a lot, to where the response that comes out, the response from the horse is not the same, say it is from me, as it is from them. And they appear to be doing the same things I'm doing, but, it's almost like the voice inside your head gets in the way. Like they, or maybe the subconscious stuff, you think about subconscious things you say about yourself, the stories you tell about yourself and the names you call yourself and all that sort of stuff. You got to kind of get all that lined out, I think, working with horses, because that is a part of that energy they pick up on.
Yeah, and I've learned a lot is just the failure of being present in the actual present moment and trying to interact with the horse. It just doesn't operate. So the more I've learned, in my chosen path in that way has been meditation and yoga. But I know there's multitude of different ways to get to that idea of the present moment. Have you heard of James French and the trust technique?
Yeah.
So, and, he teaches just kind of staring at a dot, and getting present with that dot.
The blue dot.
Yeah. And then lo and behold, the horse will start to relax. Yeah,
I've reached out to him several times to be on the podcast, and each time he was one of the first people I reached out to a couple of years ago when I started having interesting people on the podcast. I'd been aware of him for years, and so I reached out to him, and his team got back to me and said, no, he's in the middle of filming something right now. And probably a year later, I reached out again, and he was doing something else. And I don't see much of him out there in the space, so I think he's probably kind of an introvert, and I don't think he wants to be on the podcast. That's the story I'm telling myself, but he doesn't just listen to his voice and stuff. He sounds like he might be not necessarily someone who wants to bare his soul in the podcast, which is totally understandable.
So the way this podcast began was like, Dad and I have we started horses in a very like traditional natural horsemanship, pressure and release. And ultimately, when our first horse passed away, we got a Mustang, and this Mustang led us into positive reinforcement training. And while going like through this journey, and our podcast and listening to your podcast actually has led us to like, want to find out and experiment and enjoy different methods of training that are even outside of positive reinforcement. Reinforce the horse has kind of become a thing. And so we like to ask our guests, how do you like to reinforce your horse? And for us, it's sending positive energy their direction and giving them snacks that they enjoy. For some people, it's simply sitting in their energy. Some people, it's playing music around them. How about for you?
I'd say for me, it's being in constant communication with them, telling them you notice things, like even if, say I'm going to ride my horse, and I've got my horse out and he's standing there, and, I approach him with the saddle pad and he's standing there. If he turns his head to look at me as I approach him, I'll pause slightly and then keep going. And every time there's a change in focus, I will just pause slightly. And it seems like it really gets him to understand that you are, I'm basically always trying to communicate how aware I am. I think that's, like I said, I think that's their stock in trade. I think that's what makes them feel safe. And so communicating awareness is probably the thing, and what I'm doing a lot of the times is I'm communicating my awareness of their awareness. But when you get on a deeper level, you're almost communicating your awareness of their awareness, of your awareness of their awareness, of your awareness of their awareness. It kind of gets a bit like that.
It's like sounds like it's very empathetic and relationship based with how you prefer to exist around them. I love the title of your book, Relationship Before Horsemanship. Like, that speaks to me so strongly, as I feel that in my personal life, and I just feel like that's such a profound way of going about interacting with and call it connecting with them.
Yeah, so it's relationship before horsemanship. It's not relationship instead of horsemanship. Because, like I said, there's the people that have this lovely relationship with their horse, but they actually can't get them to do anything. And then there's people that can train a horse, but it's a business transaction. But I actually feel relationship before horsemanship, if you can do it well, and especially in the relationship part, in the learning all of that stuff, let's say you know how to train a horse. You have these training techniques. And then you start in this other relationship stuff first. By the time you get through all that and you go back to your training techniques, you would actually employ either different techniques, or you'd employ the same techniques differently because of what you learnt in the beginning. Because I think the big eye-opener for a lot of people is that, oh my goodness, all the problems I was having was because of the way I was going about things. These weren't horse problems. These were the way I was going about things problems. And the thing I'm trying to do these days is, I feel like what I'm trying to do here on this earth is get people to have an experience to where a long-held truth that they've had gets busted. Like, they realize that thing that I thought was the truth is not the truth. It's the way I was looking at it that caused it to be the way it was. And horses is the into that. And then what I like to do that with the horses, and then I just step back, and then people they do the work themselves. They kind of go, what other long-held truths have I had all this time that might be just my perception of what's going on, and it's not necessarily the truth? And so, people usually after they do the stuff I do with horses, they usually go down some other rabbit holes. I've heard lots of people that have listened to the podcast that say, oh yeah, that this guest took them down this rabbit hole and this guest took them down this rabbit hole. But I really feel like the horses, when you spend that time doing that relationship stuff first, especially if you've got a horse, you train them, they have sorts of problems, and then you can go back to this relational stuff. Not only is the horse different by the end of it, but the person is different, and their perspective on horse behavior is different. And then, so you could almost use the same training techniques, but you'd have a different perspective on them, so you'd actually employ them differently. Because I feel like the same technique with a different perspective has a completely different outcome. It's not so much the technique, it's the you think about, are you doing a particular thing for power over, or are you doing that particular thing out of care for? And they both could be the same thing, but there's a different energy to it. It's one of the guests I had on the podcast, Emily Kaysdottir, a lady from Sweden. I don't know if you heard that one. If you did, that would have blown your mind. You know, she talked about giving versus trading. And like when I was working with that supposedly hard to catch horse at the Horse Expo the other day, I said, I don't have an expectation of an outcome here. I'm not trading. I'm not doing tit for tat. I'm not doing this so you do that. I am doing this to get this horse to feel better, first in this environment, and second with me. That's the only thing I'm doing. I'm not trying to catch this horse. And, you know, usually after about half an hour or so, they start to cotton onto it. This horse was an hour and 15 minutes before he started to do anything different. And I just kept chipping away at it, doing the same thing over and over again. And eventually he started doing things differently because he started to feel different. You know, along those lines, I was at a horse expo last year, and I went to dinner with a lady I know from Australia. She makes horse riding apparel, and she comes over to America and goes to these horse expos. We went to dinner, and we were talking about family stuff, and she said, you know, I'm estranged from my brother, and I want to reach out to him and like reconnect, but I'm afraid I'll be disappointed because he might not reconnect back. And I said, but that you're doing that as a trading thing. If you can look at it as a giving thing, you know, so you're trading like, I'm going to talk to you if you will talk to me. I'm going to reach out to you on Christmas and say Merry Christmas if you will say Merry Christmas back. I said, don't put that obligation on there. Don't do it as a trade. Do it as a give. Do it for you. You know, like you will feel better if you reach out to your estranged brother. But you won't feel good if you reach out to your estranged brother because you expect him to reach back to you. You know, it's kind of like they say, you know, holding a grudge against someone is like drinking poison and thinking it's going to make them feel sick. You know, holding a grudge, if you hold a grudge against someone, they probably don't even know you're holding the grudge against them, but you do, and you have this negative energy in you. So, you know, so all that whole trading versus giving thing, if like working with horses, I'm just giving. I'm trying to make them feel better. At least initially, this is the relationship part. You will get all these outcomes from it, but you're not doing it for the outcome. And that's probably the hard thing for most people, because if, like that exercise that I did at that horse expo, they eventually end up coming up to me and eventually they follow me around wherever I go. If you know that's the outcome of that exercise, it's very hard not to be thinking about that end part. And then you'll be like, why isn't it happening? Why isn't it happening? Whereas if you've got to be able to just, you know, chop wood and carry water, as they say. You just got to do the work. Or as, you know, one of the most spiritual of the ancient Hindu practices is something called karma yoga. And karma yoga is doing a task with no thought as to the outcome of that task. That's giving. Having the outcome of the task in your mind, that's trading. I'm going to do this so this happens. You've just got to be, and Jason, you said before about being present. You just got to be present and interact with what's in front of you, not interact with what's in front of you because of what you're going to get from it.
Yeah, I think so much we are so caught up in what we are going to get from a situation without setting aside the time to just simply be. And I love that concept of chop wood, carry water. I mean, that's an ancient concept that goes back thousands of years. And it's like, to me, the horses really allow us to embody that concept and to really get in touch with who we are through getting in touch with who they are.
Yeah, I think the horses help us with that. Like, I think if you end up, you're relatively new to horses, but if you've been around horses for a long time, I think if you keep searching and keep asking questions, you'll end up at that place.
Well, and I love what you were saying about giving versus trading, and I've seen this a lot in my own life and with my 3 horses. And I think that this is one thing that we have sort of kind of alluded to here on the podcast, but it hasn't come up in that way before. And it's like, I mean, thinking about giving versus trading to a horse, it comes right back to our lives, our personal lives, full circle. And if we want something for our bodies, say for it to heal, I mean, I'm currently dealing with an injury and experiencing this gratitude toward this part of my body that's doing so much to heal. I can't tell it, well, if you heal, you know, you get to do this, that, and the other thing. It's more of expressing gratitude to this part of my body that's working on healing. And so that what you said about giving versus trading really did speak to me.
Yeah, it's you know, it's one of those ideas that kind of, I don't know, it kind of resonates with a lot. It fits into a lot of things. And, you know, if you think about, you know, we're talking about unraveling our societal and cultural conditioning before. You know, if you think about Darwin's survival of the fittest thing, it was actually the survival of the most collaborative. And then the most collaborative survived, you know, so that then after that, yes, of course, you've got to be fit enough to survive, but that's not the first thing. It's the most collaborative. It's not, you know, nature is, I think that's the great thing about horses is horses teach us about nature. Gardening teaches about nature. You know, you can't force a tree to grow. You know, I was just in the Midwest recently at a horse expo, and I've been in the Midwest a few times for horse expos. I haven't been in the Midwest much apart from that. But Midwestern people, because there's so much farming there, they're still kind of in touch with nature a bit. You know, like you can't force nature. But I do think that horses, if you're really going to get along with them, like if you want to argue with nature, you're going to have problems. You want to argue with horses, you're going to have problems. But if you can be a bit more collaborative with it, if you think about in nature, everywhere there's something poisonous, the antidote grows nearby. You know, there is a plant, it's the antidote to the poisonous plant that grows in conjunction with the poisonous plant. They grow close to each other, you know, like, so I really think that yeah, being around horses and working with horses and staying with it long enough until you start to have these perspective changes, you know, I think they just, you know, it's just nature energy. It's like, not nature energy, nature wisdom, earth wisdom sort of thing. I think horses are just one way to help us get connected to that.
Yeah, for sure. And there's so much wrapped up in that one sentient being that we call a horse. Like, they're so connected to their surroundings and the elements and just their energetic body. And I go right back to what you were talking about, the young horse you were working with just not long ago that came to you and was like, he brought himself into your energetic aura and was like so in tune with you and so in tune with him in a way that he was like asking and allowing you to pretty much collide with his energy and keep you both safe. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I think it is, and like I said, the more I get into it, the more fascinating it gets. You know, the more I'm really into like indigenous wisdom these days, and it's feel like the indigenous wisdom stuff and the horse wisdom stuff just collide, and you know, it's just another way of teaching us the same thing.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me that we are in 2024 and we've veered so far off course, it seems, from indigenous wisdom. And horses have been with us for some time and, you know, thousands of years perhaps. And, you know, Alyssa and I were talking not long ago about how they are continuously grounded to the earth and they just bring forward that energetic space for us to be able to enjoy.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, that exercise I did the other day with that supposedly hard to catch horse. You know, you've got to be able to do that with a certain energy in your body And I don't mean you've got to project some sort of energy, but your energy has to be, I'm here to help. It can't be, why is this taking so long? Come on, you've got to do the thing. Especially, they had a packed house in that arena there. So, it's hard for a lot of people to do at home alone. Doing it in front of a crowd of people and not jumping ahead to the end, I imagine some people would struggle with it. It doesn't bother me because I don't care if I don't get to the end. Like every time I do that at a horse expo, I'll say, okay, so I just did that. I'm going to attract his attention. Now I'm just going to let him know I saw that. And I did it the other day at the start. I said, that's all I'm going to do. I've got 2 hours. Okay. I'm just going to do that over and over. And if nothing changes, nothing changes. If it does, it does. But I'm not in a hurry to get to the end. And that's, if it's with anything, like, if you go to college and the first day of college, you're focused on getting a degree, you're not going to be in the room. And it's even with sports too. Like if the Arizona Diamondbacks won the first 30 games of the year, okay, and Sports Center is interviewing the pitcher or the leading batter, whatever, and they say, so you won the first 30 games of the year, that looks like you guys thinking about winning the World Series. And they go, no, we're not thinking that far ahead. We're just taking it one game at a time and sticking to the basics. Any sports interview you ever see where a team is going really well and they ask the quarterback or the coach or whatever about the end result, they will always say, I'm not focused that far ahead. We're just taking it one game at a time and sticking to the basics. That's why they won the first 30 games in the year. You can't win the first 30 games in the year by thinking about the end result. It's just about being in the moment and doing the thing that's in front of you. It's kind of like it's like the old story that I think it's a Buddhist story about the guy goes to the top of the mountain and says to Buddha, how do I reach enlightenment, Buddha? And Buddha says, chop wood and carry water. So the guy goes away and chops wood and carries water for 10 years and he's no closer to enlightenment. So he climbs back up the mountain and says to Buddha, it's been 10 years and nothing's happened. What should I do? And he says, chop wood and carry water. So he chops wood and carries water for another 10 years and then he reaches enlightenment. And he goes up the mountain and he says to Buddha, I'm enlightened. What do I do? And Buddha says, chop wood and carry water.
Such an amazing analogy, and going right back to the present moment and staying where it is right now and not focusing much on the future, but also having these goals. And I'm brought right back to something you mentioned talking with one of your guests. I listened to a podcast episode, and I want to say it was you communicating with Christine Dixon. I could be wrong, but you said you had been talking to someone, and this person told you that the only reason they got to their end goal was because they never believed they couldn't do it. And that has been...
Oh, yeah, that was a baseball player. That was a baseball player. That guy, I met him at a barbecue in Arizona, in Scottsdale, actually, a few years ago after a horse expo. And I didn't know he was a baseball player. He was at a friend's house and he came in the back door and was sitting hanging out, And finally I found out that he had just signed a 5-year, $110 million deal with the Cincinnati Reds. I think he was the highest paid pitcher in baseball at the time. And I said, where are you from? And he told me, and he said, I'm from Texas. And I said, where in Texas? And he told me the name of the town. And I said, where's that? He says, it's halfway between San Angelo and San Antonio. There's nothing between San Angelo and San Antonio except expanses, And I said, how big a town is it? And he said, it's 4,000 people. And I said, okay, so where did you go to college? Because as far as I know, to be drafted into the major leagues, you've got to go to college. You get, you play college ball and then you get drafted. So I said, where'd you go to college? And he goes, I didn't. I said, well, hang on, you've got to be drafted out of college, don't you? And he said, no, you can be drafted out of high school into the major leagues. And I said to him, how the hell does someone from a town of 4,000 people in the middle of Texas get drafted into the major leagues out of high school? And he looked at me and he said, I just never believed it wouldn't happen. And I was in England a while after that, and I was telling that story, and there was a lady I was at a clinic, and there was a lady in the clinic who is an Oxford-educated poet. She speaks very well. And she said, a double negative is more powerful than a positive. So he didn't say, I always believed it would happen. He said, I never believed it wouldn't happen. And so there's an energy in words, and she said a double negative is more powerful than a positive. And that, that guy's not an Oxford-educated poet, but that's the way he put it. He didn't say, I always believed it would happen. I just said I never believed it wouldn't happen.
Yeah, there definitely are extreme power in words. I've found that to be true this past year as I, started writing poems or channeling poems from the cosmos. And, I have quite a few of them racked and stacked, and just they've really spoken to me and others. I never believed it wouldn't happen is such a great way to set up yourself for manifesting things. And it seems manifestation a lot of times is just about, what's out there that I've come across is about positive thinking, or, just creating this thought atmosphere of how you're going to eventually get to the place that you want to be, whether it's, getting a particular job that gets you a certain amount of income, or you achieve certain status in this or that, or you are able to get your horse to do something specific like loading in the trailer. And it seems to me that it's helpful to not only manifest from a thinking mind perspective, but also just concentrate on being in the moment.
Yeah, but the other part is you've got to have a process too. Like that hour and 15 minutes with that horse the other day, I know what I was doing for an hour and 15 minutes was adding up to his confidence in me. I wasn't just doing something random and hoping it worked. I know that thing is going to help him feel better. And so that's the thing is I think that's the thing people struggle with. Like, it's not getting any better. Does it need more time, or am I doing the wrong thing? Because who is it? Maybe it was Einstein that said, doing the same thing over and over and expecting results to change is insanity. But sometimes doing the same thing over and over, let's say you're going to want to work on having a six-pack, okay? You go to the gym the first day, you come home, you look in the mirror like, I haven't got a six-pack. Are you going to go back and do it again, do the same thing over and over and expect the result to change? You actually are. You know what I mean? So that doing the same thing over and over and expecting result to change is insanity, or the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting result to change, unless, of course, you know that doing the same thing over and over works, and it's a slow process, like a six-pack. You know what I mean? So you've got to have a process. And I recently, every once in a while, I'll be thinking about something or whatever, and something will come to me, and I'll write it in the notes in my phone. And recently, I wrote a thing about faith and horses, and I said, in order for your horse to have faith in you, first you've got to have faith in them. And the way you communicate you have faith in them is you give up control. But in order to stay safe when giving up control, you've got to have a good process. You've got to ensure that you've done your homework enough to know that you will stay safe when you give up control. So really it comes down to you having faith in your process, which means really it comes down to you having faith in you.
That's very profound. The universe has brought that up in our lives recently, and it's just a clarification in so many ways. Warwick, this conversation with you has been absolutely wonderful. We've enjoyed every minute. Is there anything extra that you'd like to add for our listeners today?
No, not really. I think I've got most of my points across.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Everyone listening, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you everyone for being here. We really appreciate you listening and your continued support of the podcast. And I know you've enjoyed this great other side of the mic experience with Warwick Schiller. And be sure to check out his recent book, The Principles of Training. And Warwick, where can people find you if they would like to get in touch with you? WarwickSchiller.com?
Yes, you can find me there. I've got a Facebook group. A Facebook fan page, Warwick Schiller Attuned Horsemanship. And I have a YouTube channel. Just look up my name on YouTube, and I have, 300 and something videos on there for people can play with.
Wonderful.
And then I have, of course, I have my online video library as well.
And check out the Journey On podcast if you haven't already. It's been a life changer. Thank you, Warwick, so much for this time. We really, really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. And Jason, congratulations. You have raised someone who's going to change the world. Alyssa, you're awesome. I'm a fan.
Thank you.